Okay, so as I had explained, we'll just ask a few brief questions to complement. You've received the questions, but I'll answer them. I'll ask them anyways. You have compared the ethno-federalism of the TPLF that was set up in 1991 with the South African Bantustan under apartheid. Can you explain this concept?
Yes, gladly. Thanks, Nicolette. Well, the TPLF, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, came to power it seized power in 1991. So upon seizing power, what it designed for Ethiopia was what it called ethnic federalism. In reality, it was a design whereby a minority group hailing from Tigray, the northernmost province of Ethiopia, which constituted around 5% of the population. The way to rule Ethiopia was then to divide it into ethnic klils, as it's called in Amharic, but Bantustans. It had never been in practice in Ethiopia in its modern day nation state history. And so, the ethnic federal or regional states, the Bantustans, like in apartheid South Africa, were designed in such a way that they prohibited free movements of peoples. It was not citizen-based, but ethnic-based. In the ID cards, identity cards of Ethiopians, the ethnicity was always there. So in this way, by creating an atmosphere of suspicion, tensions, and conflicts between various ethnic groups, this tiny minority group could impose its minority rule over the rest of Ethiopia. So sometimes I call it ethno-apartheid or ethno-fascism, but essentially the only difference between the apartheid regime in South Africa was that a white minority group was ruling the black majority this way through Bantustans, tribal, regions. And in Ethiopia, under the TPLF from 1991 up to 2018, when it was ousted from power, this a similar type of ethnic politics through ethnic federalism was the way this minority group called TPLF was able to impose its rule over the rest of Ethiopia. And it's this toxic legacy bedevils or haunts Ethiopia to this day. There's always tensions and animosities between ethnic groups. Instead of cooperating, instead of citizen-based politics, it's ethnic-based politics. And I think this is what creates every now and then the conflicts in Ethiopia. Similar to what happened in Rwanda also in a way.
I wanted to ask, so very often we don't actually know, especially in the last 2 years, who actually the TPLF is. We know there are extreme corruption, atrocities. There's even allegations of a genocide against the Amare. So I was wondering, could you give us really a picture of who they are and why we haven't known much about them despite 27 years of being in power?
Well, as to the last question, why the rest of the world or the West didn't know much about them during the 27 years of misrule of Ethiopia was because they were a client state, they were a proxy force by which the United States and the West controlled the Horn of Africa region. So they were provided with, political cover, media cover, sometimes even like President of the United States, Barack Obama, when he visited in 2015 to the region, to Ethiopia, he lauded Ethiopia's democracy under the TPLF. So oftentimes it was this type of coverage that was a very favorable, rosy coverage that was given to them by the Western media. And thus the Western public could not know of the massive atrocities that this group committed. It was a brutal kleptocratic regime. During its 27 years, it committed massive atrocities over the Ogaden Somali region, for example. Human rights violations, crimes against humanity. And occasionally, even the Western human rights organizations like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, were forced to condemn these atrocities. In the Western region of Gambela, for instance, in 2004, 2005, 2006, genocide was committed there against the Anuak people, the local indigenous people. Elsewhere in the Oromia region, the Amhara region, the jailing of journalists, crushing of opposition, other types of massacres of civilians, false flag operations to blame the opposition groups. These types of things were carried out by this brutal minority regime of the TPLF with impunity. And because it was a client state, a proxy state of the United States to carry out its war on terror in the Horn of Africa region, it was given favorable coverage by the corporate media of the West. That's the reason that the Western public did not know much about it. But the Ethiopian people, of course, were carrying out the struggle, and eventually, between 2015 and 2018, massive popular uprisings were conducted because the people were fed up by this minority rule, and eventually, in 2018, they were ousted from power, and the new reform government of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed Ali came to power.
And since I read this amazing report published in May 2021 by the New Africa Institute called Disinformation in Tigre, Manufacturing Consent for a Cessationist War. And it provides really a very detailed analysis of mainstream international press coverage since the start of the war in November 2020. And it not only does it show certain newspapers that are misquoting or actually falsifying information, but it goes beyond that and shows an actual network of NGOs, including Human Rights Watch, think tanks, or so-called self-proclaimed Africa specialists who have really participated. Can you give us an outline of maybe some salient points of this amazing 72-page document?
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. It's a very well-researched paper titled Disinformation in Tigray, Manufacturing Consent for a Cessationist War, written by New Africa Institute and its director, Dr. Simon Tesfamariam, who incidentally now is one of the prime movers of the No More movement against foreign intervention, anti-war and pro-peace popular movement in the Horn of Africa region. So what happened was that after the TPLF was ousted from power, it fled to its home base in the north, the region called Tigre. There, it did not accept being ousted from power, but it began to plan to destabilize the reform government of Abiy Ahmed and to carry out through its proxy mercenary groups all over Ethiopia conflicts, ethnic conflicts, interethnic conflicts, interreligious conflicts, with the primary reason of making Ethiopia ungovernable for the new reform government. So between 2018 and 2020, for over 2 years, these types of acts of destabilization, of chaos and conflicts were carried out by the TPLF with impunity, because one, it had control of cell networks during its time in power. It was in control, remember, of the security apparatus, security intelligence apparatus, whereby it crushed the people. So all over Ethiopia, it had underground cell networks, and it was using this. It had vast amount of wealth at its disposal. And eventually, in November 2020, it ignited a war against the central government, the federal government, and war against the neighboring state of Eritrea. And so this planned war, it had carefully designed a propaganda war side by side. One of the things it started to hype up was Tigre genocide, to manufacture genocide, to claim that it was being victimized, that the people of Tigray, genocide was being committed against them, massacres were being committed against them. So it manufactured this type of false stories, and through its networks and contacts in the West, media personalities, so-called foreign experts on Ethiopia under its pay, it ramped up this disinformation campaign, and it had several stages, 6 stages in particular. In the first stage, it would manufacture stories from within Tigray, and this then would be fed to foreign media, who would in turn amplify it. In the West, it also had a propaganda network in the diaspora, TPLF followers, well-funded. They would also do contacts with lobby groups, with media groups to feed them this information. And then these manufactured atrocities, massacres, then were amplified by outlets like CNN, like BBC, in the mainstream corporate media. Then come academic experts, so-called, in the West, like Miriam van Rijssen, Alex de Waal, sometimes Martin de Plout, the International Crisis Group, based in Nairobi, William Davison, and all these characters would further give, credibility by pushing these stories. And then human rights groups such as Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch would also corroborate these fake atrocities, massacre being committed in Tigray, or famine being used as a weapon. And in the final stage, then this would be pushed either by Western governments in the UN Security Council or the European Union Parliament to put pressure on the Ethiopian government or Eritrea to put sanctions on it. So you saw in the final stage, for example, 10 times attempts were made to bring the issue of Ethiopia to the UN Security Council to pass some kind of resolution similar to what was passed, you remember, in Libya in 2011, and then in Syria for humanitarian intervention, as is it called, or R2P, responsibility to protect. And then under this pretext, they wanted to justify intervention or humanitarian intervention to help the TPLF come to power. So this is the kind of disinformation network that was at play from the beginning for the past 14 months.
Yes, I even saw Kenneth Roth saying that the Maikandra massacres were amazing. Actually, in a recent interview with the Grey Zone investigative journalists Ben Norton and Max Blumenthal, you said that the work of Julian Assange and WikiLeaks in particular had really helped Eritreans to make their case against false allegations in international forums. I found that very interesting. If you could maybe give us some examples.
Yeah, a great hero, Julian Assange and his WikiLeaks. He did a great service in exposing the lies of the empire, the atrocities, the political machinations behind the scene to impose sanctions on poor third world countries like Eritrea, who would not toe the line, who would not be subservient and accept the dictates of the United States, the World Bank and IMF. So essentially, because of the conflict with Ethiopia, the TPLF regime between Eritrea and Ethiopia under the border conflict pretext, and TPLF's, invasion of Somalia. Eritrea was the only country to oppose this invasion. And so Eritrea had to be punished. And to punish Eritrea and to impose sanctions on it, trumped up charges or false evidences were manufactured. So the WikiLeaks documents of Julian Assange, if you examine them from 2006 up to 2009, you will see US officials such as then UN ambassador to the UN, Susan Rice, in close coordination with Ethiopian government officials such as the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Meles Zenawi, planning to impose the sanctions on Eritrea. You would also see trumped up charges brought by the TPLF under the false flag pretext in 2006 that Eritrea had bombed, committed terrorist act inside Addis Ababa, which was completely false, of course. It is the TPLF security network which bombed a hotel in Addis Ababa. And in the WikiLeaks cable, you would see the US chargé d'affaires, Vicky Huddleston, writing to Washington saying there is no credence to this. This accusation is false because our sources in Ethiopia are telling us that it is most likely that the TPLF security apparatus that had committed the bombing. So things like this are amply, exposed in the WikiLeaks document. And this helped Eritrea later to expose the US engineered sanctions that were imposed on it at the United Nations Security Council in 2009 and later in 2011, under the false pretext that Eritrea had Al-Shabaab terrorists in Somalia. This was completely false, of course, bogus, trumped up charges. And WikiLeaks documents exposed this and helped eventually to sort of nullify these false charges. And eventually, of course, the sanctions were dropped. But the sanctions were dropped when Eritrea and Ethiopia made peace again in 2018, when Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed Ali came to power in Ethiopia, and when the TPLF was ousted from power.
And for example, this Vicky Huddleston, she was like this chargé d'affaires. She was recently actually also in a leaked document, which went to the famous Zoom conference of the ex-diplomats and ambassadors speaking. We're going to be showing a small extract of this conference. What is your comment? What is your comment on this leaked document? What does it tell us about Western diplomacy, and in general, maybe also about the comeback of the Obama-Biden administration back into the Horn of Africa?
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Yes. Well, it's the revolving door. Those in the Obama administration who worked for years in close coordination with the TPLF regime when it was in power in Ethiopia, are also now back in power in Washington. And so in that video, you clearly see them planning against the government, the central government of Abiy Ahmed Ali in Ethiopia. They're talking closely with the former TPLF ambassador, Berhane Gebrekristos, and saying, so what can we do? How can we bring about regime changes? Essentially, it was a conspiracy exposed. The leaked document, I don't know how it was leaked, but clearly former diplomats like Vicky Huddleston, like Donald Yamamoto, and other British ambassadors were closely conspiring openly with this TPLF official, Berhane Gebrekristos, who was a former ambassador to Washington and to Brussels, but now ousted from power, sidelined, of course, living in the West, using all these types of contacts and their money to buy influence and to lobby, to spread disinformation through the media networks. And that's essentially what that video you're talking about exposed. They were clearly exposed. So the revolving door is still at work. What we have now in the Biden administration in the in Washington, essentially is Obama 3, the third term of Obama, because most of the political actors like Susan Rice, Samantha Power, Anthony Blinken, and what have you, all are back in position. President Biden himself also, who was vice president during the Obama administration. And these national security elite in power in Washington are now working in close coordination with essentially the terrorist group, TPLF, which is destabilizing Ethiopia and destabilizing the whole region, spreading wars and chaos Ethiopia and beyond.
And now, just one last question then, because I know we had only half an hour. Well, I mean, I was just wondering if this last operation that just happened now, the recent bombing of the IDP camp, if that is maybe again another false flag operation, since there was really an effort for reconciliation and even a liberation of many political prisoners recently, and even TPLF prisoners, which maybe should not have been liberated. So could that be a false operation again, a false flag operation, because it's somehow all over the news and with very few sources of backing it up?
I have no doubt that it is yet again a false flag operation, because the TPLF is quite adept at carrying out these kinds of false flag operations, bombings of civilians, and then, claiming to be the victim itself. And so part of the reason, for example, that the government of Ethiopia now is reluctant to go into Tigray is that it doesn't want to be trapped into another quagmire, because it had intelligence information that the TPLF had transported hundreds of its dead soldiers from the Amhara and Afar region to Tigray, burying them in mass graves, and then later when the federal forces enter Tigray, to come out and claim, this massacre is being committed, here are mass graves, genocide is happening. They have been using these types of, dirty false flag operations to manufacture massacres and atrocities, and then use that to demonize the government and to bring in humanitarian intervention because genocide is being committed. So no doubt that what recently happened, the bombing of IDP camps, is the handiwork of the TPLF. It's a brutal, kleptocratic regime, a terrorist group, ruthless, and it will go to any lengths to fulfill its objectives of returning to power. It hasn't given up the hope of returning to power. They have been claiming this. Their spokespersons on media have been saying, we will go to the depths of hell if necessary to disrupt the government, or even to disintegrate Ethiopia and secede if we can. That's their intention. A very ruthless group that again does all kinds of dirty tricks like false flag operations to maintain itself and its hope of returning to power somehow.
And just one last question, the last one, absolutely, is what should the Italian Foreign Ministry, or in extension the EU, do differently if they were willing to bring some more peace or stability in the region?
Well, Italy has some responsibility, historical responsibility in the region. Eritrea was its former colony, so it has to do right by Eritrea. It has to play a positive, constructive role to bring about peace and stability and engage fairly with the government of Ethiopia, with the government of Eritrea, with Somalia, because Italy too will benefit from peace and stability. It Italian firms have quite a lot at stake in Ethiopia. Ethiopia is the potential to become the economic powerhouse if it is stabilized. There are engineering firms such as Salini who are working closely with the government in the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dome, the GERD at the Blue Nile. So the possibility, the dividends from peace and stability in Ethiopia and the entire region of Horn of Africa benefits Italia. So I think Italia must play a constructive, positive role. Listen to the regional actors there, the government of Ethiopia, in particular Eritrea also has been a former colony of Italy and has been demonized. So it must play a just and fair diplomatic approach to bring about peace, constructive peace in the region.
But would maybe getting rid of the sanctions be an option?
That is at the top. The sanctions imposed on Eritrea, for what reason? These US unilateral sanctions are unfair and unjust. They're economic warfare to hurt the people, to bring about regime change by others. This approach does not work. It is gunboat diplomacy. It's economic warfare. It hurts the people. It doesn't produce anything except further destabilization of the region. And under such circumstances, of course, other forces will feel the backing. We've seen recently how China has been pushing, proactively engaging in the region. It is investing heavily, of course, not only in the Horn of Africa, but the entire region. So what I'm saying is this outdated coercive diplomacy or force through economic warfare like sanctions are counterproductive, and they must be lifted. Eritrea is once again being victimized for this, and hopefully Europe must try to counterbalance this. Otherwise, you will witness further destabilization of this unfortunate Horn of Africa region.
Thank you so much, Elias. Amare, thank you so much for your time. I know they had given only half an hour, so I stopped it, although I have another.
You're quite welcome. Thank you. It's my pleasure. Piacere, my pleasure. Grazie.
And Amare, I'll get back to you for our show next week. We can.
Okay. My pleasure. Piacere, ciao.
Thank you, Elias. Ciao.
Grazie mille.
Grazie.